Whether you happen to be a fan of Tottenham Hotspur or not, one thing is for sure, the North London side have been associated with a certain brand of football down the years. From the Argentinian flair of the 70s to the famous five of the mid-90s, Spurs fans expect their team to entertain. Sadly, that has been seriously lacking of late. So, what has gone wrong? Today, we're discussing the rise and fall of Tottenham Hotspur, so stay with us. First of all, let's take a brief trip down memory lane. The Lily Whites are undoubtedly one of English football's bigger clubs, but in terms of honours, they are some way off the country's most successful club in Liverpool, who reign supreme, having won 68 major honours. With just 26 major honours, Spurs are also lagging way behind their nearest and bitterest rivals, Arsenal. Tottenham only have 2 top division titles to their name, the last coming in 1961, so it's safe to say their loyal fans have had to endure down the years, mostly settling for the odd cup run. Even then, they haven't had that much to write home about, with just the one FA Cup triumph since the early 90s. They have had a couple of League Cup wins in that time, however, but for a club as big as Tottenham, this simply isn't good enough. One thing is for sure though, Spurs have regularly fielded exciting attacking teams who have made White Hart Lane and now the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium a difficult place to go. Spurs fans' affinity for that easy-on-the-ice style arguably began all the way back in the 70s, with the arrival of the Argentinian duo Ricky Villa and Ozzy Ardiles. At a time when foreign imports was something of a rarity, the Spurs faithful welcomed them with open arms, ready for new folk heroes after the likes of Jimmy Greaves had finally hung up his boots. This paved the way for talented playmakers such as Glenn Hoddle and Paul Gascoigne, with this sort of player becoming a staple at Spurs down the years. Someone who could beat a man or produce a little bit of magic. Supremely talented players such as Chris Waddle, Ili Dumitrescu, David Ginola and Rafael van der Vaart would follow, but none would be able to lift the hoodoo of brining sustained success to Tottenham. Next up, we're discussing the transition from Sugar to Lewis. Stay tuned. Tottenham in the 90s was an attractive place to play football. Right from the start of the decade, however, there was upheaval in the boardroom. This simply added to the drama and excitement of the time, with Britpop in full swing. Alan Sugar took over in June 1991 after a brief battle for club ownership with Robert Maxwell, but the Spurs faithful never fully took to him. Sugar was often accused of just being in it for the money and treating Spurs as a business rather than a football club. This didn't go down well with fans. He did sanction 3 big transfers in 1994, however, with the signing of World Cup stars Gaico Popescu and Jurgen Klinsmann, as well as the aforementioned Dumitrescu. But the investment failed and Spurs finished 14th the following year. Klinsmann as an individual, though, was simply sublime. Sugar would later appear on TV deriding the German after he chose to exercise his opt-out clause due to a lack of European football. During his reign, Sugar had plenty of other run-ins with players and managers alike, and in 2000, after almost a decade at the helm, he decided the best course of action would be to sell. Ultimately, Sugar had failed in his bid to bring success to the White Hart Lane. But Spurs fans were treated to one of the best attacking teams around during those years, with players such as Teddy Sheringham, Les Ferdinand, Darren Anderton, Nicky Barmby and Ginola, all providing plenty of magic for the Spurs faithful. In came Joe Lewis and his investment company ENIC, who installed Daniel Levy as chairman, and a new era was underway in North London. So what happened next? After the turbulence of the Alan Sugar reign, fans of the club were desperate for some stability. George Graham, who, to be fair, had guided Spurs to the League Cup in 1999, was a victim of his past loyalties to Arsenal and was relieved of his position in March 2001. In one of the most popular appointments in any dugout of all time, Glenn Hoddle was appointed manager and received a hero's welcome in his first game back at White Hart Lane. However, the Tottenham legend would only last a little over 2 years before Levy and Lewis decided to go in a different direction after a poor run of results. And this was the pattern of play in the Spurs boardroom for the next few years, with people like Jacques Santini, Martin Jol and Juan de Ramos all taking turns at the helm. Ramos actually delivered another League Cup for the club in 2008, but his face never really fit. I mean, the fact he didn't speak English didn't really help either. Harry Redknapp was appointed in late 2008, with Spurs languishing towards the bottom of the table. Although he never delivered a trophy, the brand of football on offer under Harry certainly fit with what the Spurs fans were about. A attacking football with players such as a young Gareth Bale, with Robbie Keane, Jermaine Defoe and Peter Crouch all in their prime, meant Spurs were on the verge of actually winning something of note. Unfortunately, they could never quite get over the line, and Redknapp would leave in the summer of 2012. After burning through another couple of young managers, Levy and Lewis would appoint one Mauricio Pochettino in the summer of 2014, who would arguably come the closest of any Spurs manager in recent history to truly deliver. Next up, we're talking Poch. When the Argentinian came through the doors at White Hart Lane that summer, he brought with him a sense of urgency and modern ideas that had been lacking for some time. Of course, the Spurs hierarchy are famously frugal with their transfer kitty. So, Poch had a big job on his hands if he wanted to make Spurs competitive again. Out of the 27 signings he made, it's arguable that only 4 or 5 really made the grade, but this should say more about Lewis and Levy than Pochettino himself. Yes, he signed and got the best out of players like Dele Alli and Son Heung-min, but for every Ali and Son, there was more than one Clinton Njai and Benjamin Stamambuli. No, he wasn't going to be sufficiently backed in the transfer market, so he had to make it count elsewhere. Pochettino would outthink his opponents. During his reign, Spurs were transformed into one of the best attaching units in the league. This was outlined by their assault on the title in 2015 to 2016 in that miraculous Leicester City League winning campaign. Spurs played some fantastic stuff that year, but would criminally come third in what appeared to be a 2-horse race going down the stretch. Pochettino had proven his worth and a couple of years later would take his Spurs team to the brink of the promised land of a Champions League title. Sadly for them, they came up against a Liverpool team who were not about to lose a Champions League final for the second season in a row. We're talking investment now, kind of. Looking at Spurs right now, it's clear as day that the turning point was the summer of 2019. Spurs had just finished runners-up in the Champions League, so if they wanted to kick on, 2019 was the time to invest. Pochettino had done remarkably well to take the team all the way to the final after Levy had refused to sign any players the previous summer. So, as a show of good faith, the Tottenham board agreed to back their man in a bid to become a serious force. Sadly for the long-suffering Spurs fans, they got it badly wrong. In came Tanguy Ndombele, Ryan Sessegnon, Steven Bergwijn and Giovanni Lo Celso, names which were hardly about to strike fear into Spurs rivals at home and abroad. Yes, Levy and Lewis had sanctioned a spending spree of more than £100 million, but questions must be asked of due diligence. I mean, paying $54 million for a central midfielder from Lyon in Ndombele smacks of naivety. This is quite bizarre considering how stingy Spurs owners usually are with a checkbook. But to simply throw money like this around on one unproven young player borders on criminal, especially when it meant other areas of the squad were going to be neglected. Ultimately, that spending spree not only cost Pochettino his job, but would seriously impact Spurs' transfer budget in coming seasons. Frustrated at the path the club were going down, the Argentinian left his role in November 2019, just 5 months after almost winning the Champions League and cementing himself in the very fabric of the club for eternity. So, what's happened since? Disaster, that's what. After the appointment of Poch, who was seen as a bit of an up-and-comer, Spurs decided to go down the serial winner route, which in and of itself seemed like a decent bet at the time. In came Jose Mourinho, and then Antonio Conte, but it's safe to say neither worked out. Both were accused of using Tottenham as a stepping stone and acting as if they were doing Spurs a favour by managing them. They both brought with them a turgid brand of defensive football, which in the Guardiola and Klopp era simply isn't going to win league titles. For Spurs fans, who as we know expect a certain amount of panache when Saturday rolls around, this wasn't going to fly. Both men lost the dressing room and ultimately their jobs. What's next then? Unless Spurs heavily invest this summer, they run the very real risk of losing their status as one of the big six. Their woeful showing at Newcastle recently should be viewed as a marker of just how far they've fallen since the heady days of Pochettino. Joe Lewis, a billionaire who certainly has the funds to finance a squad overhaul, either needs to put his money where his mouth is or sell up for the good of the club. Spurs have been also-rans for far too long now, and if something isn't done soon, they could easily be reduced to the status of a mid-table team in the very near future. Thanks for dropping in today, and why not tell us what you think about what's happening at Spurs right now in the comments below. Bye guys!